Joshua chapter 18. We only have a few weeks left in the book of Joshua, and we'll begin the book of Judges, and that is an incredible account as we go through the book of Judges. If you remember with me, we are really doing a part 2 of the land being taken by the children of Israel, and now it's being given as an inheritance to the different tribes. 5 of those tribes has already received their inheritance. 2.5 of the tribes on the other side of the Jordan, and 2.5 on this side of the Jordan have already been distributed. There's 7 tribes left that need to get their inheritance, and that's where we pick up in chapter 18. I want to do, though, before we get there, is just kind of put the picture together again, because I think sometimes maybe you weren't with us the last couple of weeks, or just need to be reminded of what's happening. The children of Israel were given the land of Canaan, and God had called it the Promised Land. They had went in as a group. They had defeated all the major cities. They had wiped out Jericho, and they had wiped out, all of the big kings that inhabited the land, all the big cities that had armies that had already been taken out, but there was still the enemy dwelling in the land. And as God is going to now give to each of the tribes to go and finish this battle. Now what's interesting, the war had been won, but the battles were still very real. And really, it is a picture of our Christian life. Whenever you're looking at the Old Testament, I don't believe any of it was written just for an account of just history. I think it was written so that you and I would learn a spiritual lesson. It was written so that you and I would be able to grasp something and go, that what God was saying to the nation of Israel, He's saying to me individually. And I think all of the Old Testament was given in that fashion. It was so that you and I would take those spiritual lessons that God was teaching a nation, and that we would apply those things to our lives. That we would look at it and say, there's something more to it than just a history lesson. You see, once you come to Jesus and you ask Him to be your Lord and your Savior, and He begins to live inside of you, at that very moment, just like the children of Israel, you've been freed from the consequence of sin. The war has been won. He defeated the devil that day in your life, and He defeated the devil on the cross 2,000 years ago. And all you've done is you've become now a participant or someone who's receiving the benefits of His victory. It tells us in Hebrews chapter 2, and I love this verse. In verse 14, he says this: "Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, He Himself, Jesus Himself, likewise shared in the same, that through death He might destroy him who had the power of death, that is the devil, and to release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage." You see, you and I had no hope of eternal life. We had to live in fear because we knew that the moment we left here, there was nowhere to go but God's wrath and eternal judgment. But God freed us from that so that you have a hope. And the war has been completely won. But you and I still have a battle to fight. You see, God has a purpose for you. He's got a plan for your life. He's already determined that plan for you. He knew when you would be born, to what family you would be born to. He knew the times you would be living in. He knew exactly what battles you would face. And he promised that he would give you the ability to be victorious in those battles. Just like he did to Joshua and the children of Israel. He says, wherever your feet trod, you will have victory. It's the same with us. If you'll walk by faith, if you'll walk in obedience, if you'll just do the things that you know to be true from his word, and God's going to give you great victory, and you'll fulfill the very purpose that God created you for. But in that battle, you can choose not to take the land that he's given you. You can choose not to fulfill the purpose that he has for you. And I think that's the lesson as we're looking at these chapters, is that you and I have a choice to either go into this battle with confidence and obedience and really just hearing God's voice so that he's leading us, or we go into this battle and we just kind of throw in the towel and watch the enemy have his way. James chapter 4 in the 7th verse, and again, it's incredible how all of these kind of line up. But James chapter 4 verse 7, it says this: therefore, submit to God, resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. Draw near to God, and he'll draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. And really what James was saying, look, if you just bring yourself under the submission of God, then the devil really can't have any victory over you. You got to resist him. He's going to try to trip you up. He's going to try to influence you to idolatry, to evil. But if you resist him, he flees. Now, these tribes are going to have an inheritance, and what they were to do with that inheritance is they were to go into that land. They were to wipe out all the enemy that was still in the land, and then they would have rest, and they would have rest so that the enemy had no longer had the ability to grow or to bring their idolatry into the land or to be the influence in their life, and not only to their lives, but to the lives of their children and their children's children, generations to come, right? So that was the plan here. I want you to look, and we covered chapter 17, but I just want to remind you of a couple of things. Remember, one of those tribes decided that they would compromise. They thought, you know what, we know what God told us to do, but rather than doing what God told us to do, we have a better plan than God does. Notice chapter 17, remember verse 13? It happened when the children of Israel grew strong that they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not utterly drive them out. And here is their reasoning. You know what? If we take the Canaanites, we have the power to overcome them. We have the power to defeat them. But rather than defeating them, we can use them for our own purpose. We'll make them slaves. And what will end up happening is they'll do all of our hard labor, and we'll be able to still keep them around so that we don't have to do the hard labor. And that wasn't what God had instructed them to do. God told them to utterly destroy them. And compromise. I think compromise is one of the biggest obstacles that you and I will face in this world. It's when we think we know better than God. It's when we say, you know what, I know what God says, but that really doesn't make sense. What God said, I got a better plan than God has, and then we begin to execute our plan rather than God's plan. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, in verse 5, I love it's really my favorite verse. It's kind of what I would call my life verse. If you guys have a life verse, just something that when I heard it the very first time, I knew, you know what, that's a verse I'm going to hold on to in every decision in life. This is the verse that it's always going to be my go-to verse when I don't know what to do. And it's Proverbs 3:5, and it says this: trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. I love this part of it. Verse 7, he says, do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Don't think that you know better than God. And yet, this particular tribe, the tribe of Manasseh, thought that, you know what, rather than doing what God told us to do by wiping out the enemy, we're going to put them into forced labor, and the Canaanites end up becoming a thorn in their flesh and become someone who brings idolatry into their tribe down the road. And that's always what the enemy does. Anytime you think you're wiser than God, well, God doesn't know as much as I do, you know, you're in trouble. Once you even have that, you know, idea that, you know, well, you know, if I just do this, it's going to be better than what God said, right? That's compromise. And the children of Israel are infamous for compromising. There was another tribe, and it was in verse 14. Let's look at 14 through 16. Watch what it says. And the children of Joseph spoke to Joshua, and they said, why have you given us only one lot and one share to inherit, since we're a great people, inasmuch as the Lord has blessed us until now? And Joshua answered them, if you're a great people, then go to the forest country and clear a place for yourselves there in the land of the Perizzites and the giants, since the mountains of Ephraim are too confined for you. And the children of Joseph said, the mountain country is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites who dwell in the land of the valley have chariots of iron, both those who are of Beth-shan and its towns, and those who are of the valley of Jezreel. And Joshua said to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, saying, you are a great people and have great power. You shall not only have one lot, but the mountain country shall be yours. Although it is wooded, you shall cut it down, and to its farthest extent shall be yours, for you shall drive out the Canaanites, though they have iron chariots and are strong. Now, what's interesting in this particular situation is that the children of Joseph weren't content with what they had. They wanted more. But here was the problem. It wasn't that they didn't have more. It was that they didn't want to fight for more. They wanted it handed to them. They really had this expectation that, or this idea that they were entitled to more rather than having to fight for more. And I think there's another temptation that we face is, you know, we kind of complain, you know, well, it's not fair. I didn't get enough, or you know what? Get up. Fight. Go into the harder ground and take the ground, and go and fulfill God's purpose for your life. Don't just sit around and mope and complain because you don't got enough. And really, you look at this whole picture, and I think it's really to our generation, guys, we're living in a generation that feels entitled rather than having to labor or having to go out and you know, exert ourselves. And it's interesting that as he comes to the end of those 2.5 tribes, look at verse or chapter 18, and it's where we left off. We'll pick back up. Watch what he says. He says, and the whole congregation of the children of Israel assembled together at Shiloh. Now, they moved from the tabernacle from Gilgal to Shiloh. I love to go to Shiloh when we're in Israel. We haven't been able to go the last couple times because of security and safety concerns. But if you go to Shiloh, there's just this incredible structure there where the temple once was. And you can see in that area all of the broken jars and glass and all of the area that the children of Israel at one time had built and had lived in. Half the walls are still standing up. It's just an amazing sight to go to. You go to Israel and everything's 2,000, 3,000 years old, 4,000 years old. You're able to look at all of the history. Anything you visit in the United States, it's like 200 years old, right? 240 years old. Go look at the Statue of Liberty, or you go look at the Bell in Philadelphia, Independence. All of that. You look at that, it's like 270 years old, and you're like, that was nothing. You go to the sites in Israel, it's 3,000, 4,000-year-old sites, and you're just like, it's incredible. If it's anything in the time of Jesus, that's young. If you go to Israel, that was 2,000 years ago, right? And you go to this particular place in Shiloh, and you look at the shards of pottery and the walls that were once constructed where the temple would have stood. And it's incredible. And is the children of Israel have now made their way from Gilgal, and they've brought this tabernacle where they would worship God into Shiloh. And it says here that as they were in Shiloh, the land was subdued before them. In other words, all of the major victories had been won. And then he says in verse 2, but there remained among the children of Israel 7 tribes which had not yet received their inheritance. 5 of the tribes had received it. 7 tribes have yet to receive it. And so he tells them, Joshua says to the children of Israel, how long will you neglect to go and possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers has given you? Pick out from among you 3 men from each of your tribes. I will send them, and they shall rise and go through the land, survey it according to their inheritance, and come back to me. And they shall divide it into 7 parts. Judah shall remain in their territory on the south, and the house of Joseph shall remain in their territory on the north. You shall therefore survey the land in 7 parts, and bring the survey to me, that I may cast lots for you before the Lord our God. But the Levites have no part among you, for the priesthood of the Lord is their inheritance. And Gad and Reuben and half the tribe of Manasseh have received their inheritance beyond the Jordan on the east, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, had given them. And the men arose to go away, and Joshua charged those who went to survey the land, saying, go, walk through the land, survey it, come back to me, that I may cast lots for you here before the Lord in Shiloh. So the men went, they passed through the land, and they wrote the survey in a book in a 7-part by cities. And they came to Joshua at the camp of Shiloh, and Joshua cast lots for them in Shiloh before the Lord. And there Joshua divided the land to the children of Israel according to their divisions. Interesting, Joshua gets, what are you guys still sitting around for? Get up. How long will you neglect to go and take your inheritance? Go and possess the land. And I think he's giving us a picture here of complacency. You see, we had some of the tribes that were already compromising. You got one of the tribes that's already complaining. They had this expectation that they were going to get more than they should deserve more than they got. But you got 7 of the tribes that are standing around. They're going, we're comfortable right where we're at. And Joshua goes, what are you guys doing? Why are you neglecting to go and possess the land? Give me 3 guys from each of your tribes, 21 of them. They're going to go out and they're going to go and survey the whole land, and they're going to come back and break it into 7 parts. And then rather than you choosing which part you're going to get, we're going to cast lots for it. And that was a way of saying God's going to choose which land you get, each of the tribes. You're not going to choose your land. God's going to choose your land for you. It's not going to be something that you guys wrestle for, flip coins for, that you kind of decide amongst each other and have some kind of a vote or democracy. He's saying we're going to do is we're going to take lots, and we're going to cast the lots for each of the territories, and we're going to allow God to choose our lot, our inheritance. And guys, again, it's that same picture. Your inheritance has already been chosen for you. God's already given you. The only question is, are you going to go and possess it? The only question left is, are you going to slack? Are you going to fall short? Or are you going to tarry or put it off? Or are you going to stand up and say, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to fulfill what God has created me for. And he sends these guys out. He sends them out. And the whole idea here is that, you know, rather than having complacency, that you would have an urgency to do so. Rather than just kind of going, hey, you know, whenever we get our lot, or whenever you know, whatever happens. He goes, man, you know, have some passion. Go out and fulfill the thing that God designed for you, what he created you for. Rather than complacency, have urgency. And it's almost as though Joshua is rebuking them here. How long are you guys going to neglect it? How long are you going to just sit around? Go out and, you know, do what you were instructed to do. I mean, you know, think about how all of their forefathers longed for that day to finally come when they're in the promised land. When they were in bondage and slavery, they longed for that day when the promises of Abraham would finally be fulfilled, and they're in the land flowing with milk and honey, and now they're in the land flowing with milk and honey, and they're there going, you know, hey, no big deal. And Joshua goes, how long are you guys going to wait around? How long are you going to neglect? You see, all of the prophets were pointing to the days that you and I are living in. All of the prophets were longing for the day when Jesus would come back. And I can see that being our generation, guys. And how many of us just kind of go through life with no vision, no perspective. We're just kind of waiting around, just kind of living life day to day, rather than saying, God, what is it that you want from me? What is it that you've called me to? What's the land that I'm to take? What's my inheritance? How can I be used by you? How can I bring others to know you? I mean, what is it that you have for my life so that I can bring glory to your name? Because one day you're going to leave this world and your eternal inheritance is going to be given. And your eternal inheritance is going to have a great dependence upon what you did with what's here. What you've been entrusted now. You've been faithful with the little things. You'll be entrusted with greater things. But if you're not faithful with the little things, you're not going to be entrusted with anything. Over and over, the scriptures, Jesus would emphasize that idea. If you haven't been faithful with the 2 minas, why is it going to give you 5 minas, or 10 minas? Why doesn't it give you 2 cities if you can't be faithful with the little? How are you going to be faithful with much? And what's incredible in this whole picture is that Jesus is giving them their inheritance, giving us our inheritance. Joshua, which is the same name, Joshua in Hebrew, translated from Hebrew to Greek, is Jesus. And it's incredible is that Joshua is telling, here's your inheritance, guys. Now, we're going to cast lots, and then you got to go take care of business. And Jesus has done the same thing for us. He's already given us our inheritance. Now it's in our hands to go and begin to be faithful with what he's entrusted to us. Notice chapter 18, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. 2 reasons. Well, let's say 1 reason. I can't pronounce all the names. I'll just be honest. This list is crazy. And so we're going to skip the names. Jump down to chapter Let's look at verse 11. And the lot of the tribe of the children of Benjamin came according to their families, and the territory of their lot came out between the children of Judah and the children of Joseph. Benjamin's going to get his lot. And then just after that, it's just listed all of the borders and all of the landmarks and all the different places from city to city of what would be their territory that they would take. And then chapter 19, Simeon. Watch what happens to Simeon. And the second lot came out for Simeon, for the tribe of the children of Simeon, according to their families, and the inheritance was within the inheritance of the children of Judah. Now, Simeon's not going to get additional land. What had happened is that Judah had more land than they could handle. And so God was going to give Simeon some of the land that Judah had already possessed. And it's interesting. Go back to chapter 17. There in chapter 15 is where I'm looking at. 15, verse 63. As for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the children of Judah could not drive them out, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Judah at Jerusalem to this day. And what is being described for us is that Judah had more land that they could conquer. And they couldn't handle the enemy. So what God is going to do is going, look, I'm going to send Simeon to be in some of the territory that you're in so that you're able to defeat the enemy. And I think there's a spiritual picture here. I think there's a spiritual principle placed within there. Because, you see, God's never going to give us more than we can handle. He'll never do it. If your capacity is, this big, He's only going to give you that much. If your capacity is this big, then He's going to give you that much. And if your capacity is greater, it's not a matter of, whether you're having a greater capacity. It's whether are you going to be faithful with the capacity that you have. You see, God isn't going to look down on someone who can only handle this much and say they failed if they're faithful with that much. But if they have a capacity for this much land, this much gifts, this much responsibility when it comes to the eternal things, then they're going to be held responsible for that much. And God said, you know what? Judah could not handle that much, so He brings Simeon and He brings them into the land. And I think in our spiritual life, it's the very same thing. Understand something, guys. God will never give you more than you can handle. No temptation is going to be thrown at you that God's going to go, that'll crush them. Never. He will always give you, only what you can handle. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13 tells us that very thing. He says, watch this, no temptation has overtaken you except such as common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it. I like that. He goes, you may be thinking, you don't understand the temptation I'm in. It's way bigger than me. No, it's not. Because God would have never gave it to you if He didn't think you could handle it. With the temptation, He gives a way of escape. Well, you don't understand. I can't escape it. It's got a vice on me. I'm just drawn back to my old life. I'm drawn back to the drugs. I'm drawn back to the alcohol. I don't know how to defeat it. The problem is you don't know how to defeat it. It's that you don't want to defeat it. That's the problem. Because God will always give you a way of escape. And it's not that the children of Judah couldn't handle it. It was God saying, hey, you guys need help here, so I'm going to send Simeon. I'm going to give them some of the land because you need someone to come alongside you to help you. And God will always bring that someone along your side to help you when you're overwhelmed. And it's incredible that we have a picture of that here. Is that the children of Israel are in the middle of this battle. Now, look at chapter 19 verse jump down to verse, well, let's look at the different tribes. Look at verse 10. The third lot came out for the children of Zebulun according to their families, and the border of their inheritance was as far as Sarid. And he gives us all of the borders and all of the landmarks that would define that border. Verse 17, he says, the fourth lot came out to Issachar for the children of Issachar according to their families. And he begins to lay out all of their borders. Verse 24, the fifth lot came out for the tribe of the children of Asher according to their families and their territory, including Hilketh and Heli and Beaton and that name. I told you, those names are crazy. And all of those guys. And all of their villages and all of their land. And you know, we're up to the fifth lot. And then we come to verse 32. And the sixth lot came out of the children of Naphtali. For the children of Naphtali according to their families. And he begins to give the list of all of their inheritance and all of their land. And that was to their children. And he just begins to lay all of that. Now, verse 40 is interesting. Watch this. The seventh lot came to the tribe of the children of Dan according to their families. The territory of their inheritance was Zorah and Eshtaol and Ir and Shemish and the rest of those. Jump down to verse 47. And the border of the children of Dan went beyond these, because the children of Dan went up to fight against Leshem and took it. And they struck it with the edge of the sword. They took possession of it, and they dwelt in it. They called Leshem Dan after the name of Dan, their father. Now, Dan was the farthest northern city in Israel. It's kind of up against Lebanon and up against Syria. And when you go, it's again, another incredible place to visit when you go to Israel. We always make sure to go to the city of Dan, because it's there in the city of Dan is the oldest gate in existence. It's a mud gate. And it's over 4,000 years old, and it's the oldest city that has a gate that's intact. And the city of Dan is where the children of Israel, when they broke into two nations, into two different parts, had established idolatry. It's where they would put the golden calves, and they would go worship the golden calves. Rather than go to Israel to worship at the temple, they now begin to worship there in Dan. And it seems that they had this whole root of idolatry from the very beginning. They weren't content with what God had given them. You know, God told them, here's your borders. And they go, no, we want to go and grab this other city by the name, as he listed it there, of Leshem. And Leshem was something that God never instructed them to take. You know, it was a land that was not within their territory to take. And any time we're taking areas that God never tells us to take, that's idolatry. It's exactly what Satan did to Eve in the garden when God said to Adam, of all of the trees you can have, but of this one tree, you shall not eat of it. And the devil comes and says, you know what? God's holding out on you, Eve. God doesn't want you to have fun. God doesn't want you to be wise and smart, because if you eat of the tree, the day that you eat of the tree, you're going to become like God. You're going to make your own decisions. You're going to do whatever you want to do rather than under the confines that God has you under. And Satan always brings those lies to us, and really it's idolatry. When God gives us the parameters we're to live our life under, it's not because God's holding out on us, guys. It's because God loves us and he wants to protect us. Just like any father puts a fence around his yard if you're going to let the kids play in the front yard, because he doesn't want them to run out into the street, because he knows that if they run out into the street, a car can come and destroy them. That's not confining them. It's protecting them. It's not being cruel or restrictive. It's in reality, it's being loving and caring and wanting to put a safe place so that your child doesn't get run over by that car driving 40 miles an hour, down the front of your house. And God will never put a restriction on us just because he's trying to hold out on us. Usually God puts a restriction because he knows what those things will do to us. He doesn't tell us that sex is confined to a marriage just because God's wanting to confine us from having fun. God's telling you because that design is where two people become one. And you're going, well, God's just being mean. God just being restrictive. No, he's doing it because he loves you. Because he knows that, man, if you're out and you're sharing your body with people that don't love you or care about you, it's going to cause emotional damage. It's going to cause physical damage. It's going to cause, the disease to inhabit you. And it ends up hurting you rather than helping you. I can't tell you how many times when I was partying, I thought that God was mean because he didn't let me smoke pot. He made it after all, right? And if God created it and it's a natural plant to me, why shouldn't I be able to get high? And I argue with anyone who would argue with me about it. It's natural, man. It's good for you. But I know this, I smoked pot since I was 12 till I was 22, and it took me like 5 years just to kind of come out of the fog. I couldn't remember anything. I had a hard time remembering Scripture. I had a hard time, having any incentive because, that stuff just kind of makes you lethargic. It kind of puts you in a numb state. And we're living in a culture where that's becoming normal and acceptable, and everyone's just, you can get prescriptions so that you can be high 24/7. But I can tell you what, man, it affects you. Now, I'm not saying there's not medical aspects to any medicine. I think it's a danger with what we're dealing with painkillers right now. I mean, I think it's affecting a lot of people. And I'm saying, well, just because it's prescription, it's okay. I'm just saying is that, what, if you're not in your right mind, how are you going to hear God's voice? If you're not in your right mind, how are you going to share the love of Christ with others? How is it going to affect your witness? And God isn't telling these things to restrict us. He's telling these things so that we can be effective. So that we can have a witness, so we can fulfill the purpose that he's given us. You can't fulfill the purpose God's given you if you're stoned all the time or drunk all the time or you're out there living an immoral lifestyle. You can't. You'll never fulfill the purpose that God has for you if you're going to remain in that state. And what's incredible is that Dan was never content with what God had given them, and so they went outside the borders that God had prescribed for them. And it ended up becoming really their demise. Because when it came to their worship, they said, well, what's the big deal? We don't have to worship in Jerusalem. We'll just build our own altar here in Dan. And it became idolatry. We don't have to go under the confines that God gave to worship at the temple. We'll just make up our own religion. We'll just do our own thing. Who needs God? Who needs his word? We can just worship God wherever we're at. We can just worship God in Dan if we want. And God saw it as idolatry. And so it was, I think, the root of it, man, right from the beginning, right here, they're already going, we're not going to go under the confines that God establishes. We're going to do what we want to do rather than what God says to be true. right? And then look at verse 49. And here's where we're going to wrap it up, guys. Verse 49 to verse 51. When they had made an end of dividing the land as an inheritance according to their borders, the children of Israel gave an inheritance among them to Joshua, the son of Nun. Now remember, Caleb's 85 years old. And he was just as healthy and strong as when he was 40. That was Caleb's testimony. Joshua is older than Caleb. He's somewhere in his hundreds. So you got someone that's, easily in his 100-year-old mark of his life. And now Joshua is going to get his inheritance. Now watch what happens. Look at verse 50. According to the word of the Lord, they gave him the city which he asked for. Timnath Serah in the mountains of Ephraim, and he built the city and he dwelt in it. And two things that stand out. He's asking, Joshua gets to pick any part of the land, and rightfully so. It's Joshua. He's been leading this battle. He's the one who's been kind of the instrument that God has been using to bring them into the promised land. Joshua goes, any city you want, it's yours, Joshua. And it says Joshua asked for Timnath Serah, which is in the mountains of Ephraim. Do you guys remember the mountains of Ephraim? Go back with me real quick. Chapter 17. Look, verse 14. We read it already, but I think just to remind you. And it's there in verse, look at verse 15. Joseph, the children of Israel. No, it's verse 15. So Joshua answered them, if you are a great people, then go up to the forest country and clear a place for yourselves there in the land of the Perizzites and the giants, since the mountains of Ephraim are too confined for you. Guys, where was the mountains of Ephraim? It's where the giants were. It's where the mountain country. It was the hardest land to overcome. Joshua was 100 years old plus. And Joshua didn't say, well, you know what, give me the easy place. Joshua was going, give me the hardest place. Give me the most difficult battle. It tells us there at the end of chapter 17, there in verse 18, it's where they had iron chariots and strong warriors. Iron chariots and strong warriors. It was the most difficult land in all of Canaan and all of the promised land to overcome. And Joshua says, you know what? I want that land. Why did Joshua want that land? Because he knew that his God was big enough to handle that battle. He didn't want the easy road. He didn't want the soft place to inhabit. He wanted the hard land. And Joshua's, you guys are afraid of those giants. Let me at them. I'll gnaw on them. I'll stab them in the toe. Right? Because that's about as high as he can reach with those giants. I'll get him. I'll kick him in the ankle. That's what I'll do. Here's a guy that in his hundreds. And then there was something else that struck me is that Joshua didn't get an inheritance. Joshua got a city. Did you see that? It wasn't a territory. All the rest of the tribes are getting a territory. Joshua goes, I just want a city. And it's fitting that Joshua would get a city. Because our Joshua is going to have a city. It's not going to be a territory. It's going to be a city. In the book of Revelation, chapter 21, when Jesus comes back for the final time, this is what it says of it. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and he showed me a great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her light was like the most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Also, she had a great and high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates. The names were written on them, and their names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. 3 gates on the east, and 3 gates on the north, and 3 gates on the south, and 3 gates on the west. Now the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. You see, Jesus is going to come, and he's going to establish a new city. A new Jerusalem. It's going to be a glorious city, and Joshua is going to reign there. Jesus, our Joshua, who brought our victory for us, and he's given us our inheritance. You see, he's already accomplished it, guys, and you and I are living now so that we can go out and we can be faithful with the inheritance that we've been given. And we're going to one day live with our Joshua in the holy city forever and ever and ever. I mean, it's just an incredible picture. I want to ask you to turn one more place, and we'll wrap it up. 1 Peter chapter 1. Look at verse 3 with me. 1 Peter chapter 1. You see, Peter understood that concept. He understood that idea of 1 Peter chapter 1. Watch what he says. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Look at verse 4. To an inheritance, incorruptible, undefiled, that does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you, who are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation. Here it is, ready to be revealed in the last time. Your inheritance. It's God's design. And he's already reserved a place for you. It's all by the power of God, and it's just a matter of you and I walking in it now. You know what was amazing as we started Joshua is that Joshua was promised, everywhere you go, Joshua, you'll have victory. Everywhere you go. Everywhere your feet trod, you're going to defeat the enemy. There's not one place that you go that you won't take it if you'll just go there. The sad thing is that they never took all the land that was given to them. They never did it. By the time they get to chapter 23, Joshua's got to, for the very last time, Joshua stands up. He knows he's about to die, and he says, guys, I've given you all the land, but you've allowed the enemy to come and influence you. I've given you all the land. God has already brought victory in every arena, but you've allowed the Canaanites and the Perizzites to dwell with us. And now they've set up their idols and their temples. They've now, got you worshiping their gods. And Joshua says, choose for yourself this day whom you're going to serve. Choose. And what Joshua was telling them is, look, you're already involved with your idolatry, but you can repent of it if you'll just right now turn. If you'll just make a choice. Choose this day whom you're going to serve. And Joshua would say, but as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And it all comes down to a choice. Who are you going to serve? You want to compromise? You have every opportunity to do that. You have every temptation to allow you to do that. You can choose, like many in Israel, just to kind of, neglect what God has given you to do. Be complacent. You can sit back and, like some of the tribes, just expect everything to be handed to you, or you can stand up and say, you know what, I'm going to fulfill the purpose that God has for my life. I'm going to walk by faith. I'm going to trust God. I'm going to seek His face. And it's all really a choice that you have to make. Your friends can't make it for you. Your mom and dad can't make it for you. Your husband, your wife can't make it for you. You got to make a choice. Who are you going to serve?